Hey, third grade, how are you doing today? Great, I hope. Today we are going to talk about chapter 37, Troubled Africa. The first section I'm going to summarize, and the second section I'll be reading so you can follow along when I start reading the second section. Okay, let's get started. All right, so before I start reading the first section, here's a map of South Africa. And the red dot is where the Zulu kingdom is located. That's the Zulu kingdom is what we'll be reading about. And then the little map to the left-hand corner, the gray one, that's the world map, and it shows you where South Africa is in relation to the rest of the world. So you can see Africa's right below Europe and Asia next to South America. The Zulus were an African tribe. Their king, Shaka, caused trouble for all of South Africa. He had a very bad temper. He was very violent. He became angry at his tribe because they had treated his mother badly. And they treated him badly as well. Here's a picture of what Shaka's mother may have looked like. So they were treated badly. So Shaka taught an army to fight with discipline and to use short spears. See, back then the Zulu tribes usually used long spears, and once they threw those long spears, that was it. They didn't have another weapon to use. It was gone because they'd throw it. If they miss, then too bad. They lost their spear. So Shaka taught his people to fight with short spears, so they keep it in their hand and they could use it over and over. But they would have to get up close to their enemy that way. So he taught them to use short spears. Then he attacked the men who had mistreated himself and his mother. Shaka then set out to conquer the tribes all over South Africa. Here's kind of a neat map I want to share with you. The orange and red kind of semicircle on the coast of South Africa represents Zulu's kingdom, and all the different colored arrows represent African tribes that Zulu ran out of his kingdom, of his land. So he was able to conquer all that land and drive all those different African tribes out. So you can see how good he was in strategy and in battle. He was very successful. Although he did, during these attacks, 2 million Africans died. 2 million. A lot of Africans died. So they called this the crushing. All this attacking and driving people, the Africans out, was called the crushing. And in their language, it was the Umfaken. They called it the Umfaken, which meant the crushing. After the crushing happened, Zulu's mother died. And after she died, Shaka, the Zulu king, he went mad. So he was already violent and angry, but after his mom died, he just couldn't take it, and he started doing things that didn't make sense. He treated his people very badly and just made them fight all the time without resting. And finally, his people fought back because they had had enough, and they turned on him and killed him. Okay, so after Shaka died, his half-brother took over the Zulu kingdom, and his name was Dingaan. And that is essentially what the first section of our book was about. And we're going to start reading the second section, The Boers of the British. If you want to follow along with me, open up your book to page 346. Page 346. Dingaan did not share Shaka's anger or his desire to conquer as much of Africa as possible, but Dingaan, too, was a warrior king. His turn to fight would come soon. Down at the bottom of South Africa, almost 1,000 miles away from Zulu villages where Dingaan reigned, lay the European settlement called Cape Colony. If you'll take a look at this map, I know it's a little fuzzy, sorry about that, but you can still see at the bottom of South Africa, the yellowish-greenish circle there, that is Cape Colony, and that's where the English settled. 150 years before, the Dutch had built a little trading post here so that Dutch ships heading around the African coast toward the east could stop and restock with food and water. The Dutch governor of the trading post built a fort, plowed himself a garden, and then planted an almond hedge around its edge. The almond hedge showed the edge of the Dutch land in Africa. As the years went on, more Dutch settlers came to Cape Colony. They were given farms behind the fort, close to the coast. They grew vegetables and pastured sheep on their slopes of the African hills. These Dutch called themselves Boers, Dutch for farmers. Their farms extended further and further into Africa. The nearby African tribes, the Khoi and the San, tried to fight back when Boers invaded their lands. But the Dutch had guns and horses, and the Africans were forced to retreat. Like other European colonists, the Boers used slaves to help run their farms. The sheep needed plenty of feeding, watering, shearing, and herding. The cows needed to be milked and pastured. Butter and wool had to be carried down into Cape Colony to trade for sugar, coffee, tobacco, and gunpowder. By the time that Shaka started on his conquest, there were 15,000 slaves in Cape Colony. Here's a map I want you to take a look at so you can see where the Dutch came from. The dark green at the tip of Africa, that's South Africa where Cape Colony is, where the Zulu kingdom is. And if you look where they've zoomed in here on the map, that's where it's in red, that's the Netherlands. The Netherlands is where the Dutch people are from. And this isn't marked on the map, but to the left of the little red mark, the little tiny, tiny red mark that's got the square around it, that is England. So you have England, the Netherlands, which is where the Dutch are from, and the Dutch that are in South Africa are the Boers. So when we say the Boers, that means the Dutch that came over to live in South Africa. Okay, let me keep reading. The British had always wanted to own Cape Colony. After years of skirmishing with the Dutch, occupying Cape Colony, giving it back, and then taking it again, the British finally claimed the colony for good in 1820. English settlers began to arrive. An English governor now ruled over the colony. The Boers hated British rule, and they weren't fond of the English colonists who were settling down nearby. But when Britain declared slavery illegal in all of its islands and colonies, that was the last straw. The Dutch didn't think that they could manage without their slaves. Between 1835 and 1843, 10,000 Boers left Cape Colony. They put their furniture, their goods, their families, and their slaves into wagons pulled by oxen and set off into the unknown depths of Africa, looking for another place to settle down. This journey was called the Great Trek of the Boers. It was a hard and perilous trip, but the Boers had been toughened by life on their sheep farms. The British writer Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who invented Sherlock Holmes, lived in the days when the Boers were settling South Africa. He called these Boers the most rugged unconquerable people on earth. Take a community of Dutchmen, he wrote, who defended themselves for 50 years against all the power of Spain. Intermix with them a strain of those inflexible French. Train them for 7 generations in constant warfare against savage men and ferocious beasts, in circumstances under which no weakling could survive. Place them so that they acquire exceptional skill with weapons and in horsemanship. Combine all these qualities in one individual, and you have the modern Boer. Napoleon and all his veterans have never treated us so roughly as these hard-bitten farmers. The hard-bitten Boers traveled into Africa through the wasteland left by Shaka's soldiers. When they reached Dingaan's territory, they were pleased with what they saw. This could be their new homeland. Dingaan didn't want them there on the edge of its kingdom, but he was wary of their horses and guns. The Boers settled down, unpacked their wagons, and started to build new farms. A small party of them struck out toward the village where Dingaan lived, hoping to make friends with the Zulu. Dingaan ordered them all put to death. That was a mistake. The Boers gathered themselves together for the attack, but they didn't rely on their guns alone. Boer leaders found out that one of Dingaan's half-brothers, Umpandi, hoped to be king. They promised Umpandi that they would make him king of the Zulu if he would fight on their side. With Umpandi's help, the Boers fought several bloody battles with the Zulu. The most famous took place on the banks of the Nkomi River. Later, the Boers claimed that the blood had fallen Later, the Boers claimed that the blood of fallen Zulu warriors turned the river red. The battle became known as the Battle of Blood River. This defeat settled Dingaan's fate. He fled from the Boers and disappeared into the heart of Africa. The Zulu hostility was broken. The Boers settled down near Durban, where the 2 English merchants had established their trading post. They called their new home Natal. 4 years later, the British claimed Natal from the Boers too. The Boers traveled back toward the center of the continent. When their journeys were over, they had established 2 more nations in Africa, the Orange Free State and the Transvaal Republic. South Africa was slowly becoming a land filled with white settlers and their slaves. Okay, that's the end of chapter 37, and this map I have up here shows you Cape Colony, which the British ended up owning, even though the Dutch started it. And then they ended up taking over Natal as well. The Orange River is the same thing as the, what did they call that in the book? The Orange Free State. So the Dutch lived there, and Transvaal, they lived there as well. So you can see the white people are indeed starting to take over large parts of Africa. I wanted to leave you today with this word of encouragement. It's from the Bible. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. Colossians 3:23. So that means that word heartily means work your hardest. Work with strength and give it all you have when you do your work. And you do that to please the Lord, not to please men. Of course, we want to please our parents for sure. But when you please your parents, you're pleasing the Lord. So ultimately, we want to work our hardest to please the Lord, just like the Boers did. The Boers worked heartily. They worked hard through the Great Trek. They worked hard to be farmers and provide food for their families. So let's remember them when we're working heartily. Let's try to be like them in that way. All right, kiddos. So y'all have a great day. I will be praying for you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.